Programming. So this will be our very first class in object-oriented programming. So we learn about the concept of a class. We learn about the concept of an object of class. We learn about class constructor. We learn about object properties. And class methods. Okay, what is a class? Class is short for classification, meaning it's a template, something after which you can create your objects. Objects of a class are variables of class type, and they're also called instance. Constructor, method to initialize object properties. Object properties are values that represents an object. Class methods are methods that allows one to interact with the class, which is called the public interface, or we call it encapsulation. So let's create a class called employee. That's the name of my class. So that takes care of my very first item, class, which is a short for classification, meaning template. Now, before we start anything else, let's start creating some of the what we call class level variables, such as employee count equals to 0. We will create constructor, and we'll create other methods besides constructor. In Python, how do you create a function? What is the first word that you type when you are creating a function? So, def. So let's do that. Underscores. It looks like a one long line in it. Underscores. And then what is it that you pass in the parentheses? Self. If you want to pass any parameters, you can do that too. For example, I can say name is one parameter and salary is the other one. So I'm passing two properties. Remember, you can only have one constructor per class. Only one constructor per class. You can customize it however you wish to customize it. Self dot name equals to whatever name comes through. Self dot salary equals to whatever salary comes through. Then, if I want to do anything with that emp count, which is my class variable, then I have to type the name of the class, and then I can say, well, every time a constructor gets called, please increment the employee count by 1. So anytime I call constructor of the class, what will it do? It will initialize the name with the name value, salary with the salary value, and will increment the employee count by 1. An employee count will be maintained as a universal entity or a global entity for all variables of employee type. So what does that mean? That means if I create, let's say, an employee called Tom, right? So Tom called the constructor, and Tom will have his own value for name and salary. Then comes Jeffrey. Jeffrey calls the constructor. Jeffrey will have its own value for name and salary. But what will be incrementing from Tom to Jeff? Employee count. Employee count is not specific to each one of them. Rather, employee count is shared between the two of them, because what is the level of employee count? Employee count is at the class level, not the constructor level. Anything at the constructor level will only work for the instance. And what is an instance? Like Tom or Jeff, who are variables of class type. They're called instances. Anything outside the constructor will be global. Okay? Now, let's go down here. Let's create the other methods. Is everybody clear about the constructor? Okay, so let's define another function called display count. Again, we have to pass self. Print total employee count, or I can say total employees and employee dot emp count. Now let's define another function called display employee, and this is where we want to display all the employee information. So we will print the name of the employee is self.name, and salary is self.salary. That completes the class definition for us. So let me write here in the comments, class definition starts from here, starts, and this is where the class. Any question about the class definition? Okay. Now let's start using the class. So what is the first thing that you do? You got to create what we call class instances. Class instance. What does that mean? We will create variables of class type and use the class. Now let's revisit our PowerPoint presentation. To want to create an employee, let's say employee number 1, I call, my constructor name will be what? What is the name of my class? Employee, right? So my constructor will be employee with parentheses. However, my employee needs 2 values, one for the name. If you can see line number 14, it needs a name and it needs a salary. So I will pass a name and I'll pass a salary. Okay. Now if I want to create another instance, so I'm going to call this one instance 2. Can you help me create this instance? What is it that I will type first? Okay, M2. Okay, then I type equals to, and then what do I type after that? Look at him, line number 29. What did I do? Employee1 equals to, I call the constructor, right? It's the same thing. Employee2 equals to, you call the constructor. What does the constructor need? It tells you, Spider tells you right away. What are the two things that it needs? The name of the person and the salary. Now, let's see if you can create the third instance yourself. Okay, everybody got the third guy in? M3 equals to employee. Okay. Now is the time to see the progression of the employee count. Once the first employee gets created, let's see what the employee count looks like. So I will use my employee instance dot. Notice it automatically gives me the functions available, methods available. Let's call the display count. What do you think is the employee count right now after the first instance gets created? 1. Okay. So go ahead and run your program at this level after. Just call the display count after the first employee and see. The employee count is what? 1. Now let's repeat this after each one of the other two instances, just so that you could see the progression, to see that indeed this variable is shared between all instances. After the first instance, the employee count is 1. After the second instance, the employee count is 2. After the third instance, the employee count is 3. Got that? Okay. Now let's start working with the other methods, which is we need to figure out the details of each and every employee, and we'll do that towards the end. So displaying employee details. So I can call emp1 dot display employee, and I can repeat the same process for each one of the other two employees. Every time I call display employee, I am only calling for that instance. So when I run it, it will now, for the first one, it'll say the name is John, so salary is 45,000. Now that's called values for the employee 1. So as you can see, the name and salary are not shared, but employee count is shared because it's at the class level. That is the difference between creating at class level versus creating at instance level. Instance level entities are declared inside the constructor, and class level entities are declared in the class, not inside any particular